Over the olive groves, the wind carries a sound the locals refuse to name in daylight. At night, it gathers in the root-deep hollows, a sound like an animal that is not an animal, a scraping like iron on stone. People avoid the track that cuts behind the ruined villa. They say the earth remembers who it has wronged. This is the story of Kallikrates, a name carved on a shard, erased from the ledger and whispered in fear. They buried him once. The earth would not keep him. 2,000 years ago, in a town stitched between olive terraces and the bright, shallow sea, Kallikrates was a man with debts and a temper. He was neither noble nor pauper, a middleman who collected rents, weighed grain, and kept ledgers. In a world where honor was currency, Kallikrates made enemies. A contract missing a signature, a shipment of oil gone, a widow's testimony ignored, it was enough. One bitter night, neighbors dragged him to a shallow pit beyond the vineyards, bound him, and buried him with stones thrown like heavy punctuation. The town would later say he died for his crimes. Some would whisper he was murdered because he knew too much. Years passed, the farmhouse went to ruin. The pit collapsed over itself, and the land grew over with thyme and bramble. But grudges do not vanish like dust in the sun. The first accounts in living memory come from men who watch flocks at dusk. A shepherd named Demetrius swore he saw a light moving across the olive trunks, too low to be a moonbeam, too steady to be a firefly. The light returned nights later with a sound like iron dragged across the ground. Another shepherd found fresh scratches on the stone of the ruined well, long parallel marks that ended abruptly, as if something had clawed itself free. Dogs refused to go near the path. A child playing with a clay toy near the grove claimed at dinner that a pale man had asked him how to find the sea. The child's father laughed at first. The next day, the same child woke covered in a fine gray dust and could not speak for a week. Small things grew into fear. In the late 19th century, an antiquarian named Nikos arrived, half scholar, half gambler. He purchased the ruin and set men to clearing ivy, coaxing up foundation stones that had not seen light in centuries. He found shards painted, flaked, with traces of red pigment, and one small shard that bore a pressed name, Kalli, a fragment but enough to re-speak the name. Nikos was impatient. He ignored an old woman who warned him to leave the earth to its silence. Night after night he stood in the doorway of the ruin, pipe in hand, cataloging his finds by lamplight. Once, a worker refused to go below ground. He said, "It is not for us to take what keeps company with the dead." Nikos laughed and gave him coins. The man left. Within weeks, one of Nikos's younger assistants fell ill after coughing blood. Another fled, white-faced, claiming he had seen a man in chains standing over his pallet at dawn. When Nikos finally broke the pit open, he found, beneath a layer of collapsed tiles, a crude stone-lined chamber no larger than a wardrobe. Inside, a simple wooden box reduced to rot, a scatter of hairpins, and a flat bronze token. But there was also the unexpected, fragments of corroded iron that had once been shackles, not the cheap rope he had expected, but iron broken and twisted as if under strain. The locals, when they heard, grew quieter. They would not call the police. They began to leave offerings at the foot of the ruin, a bowl of olives, a bit of wine, in a ritual older than any ordinance, as if to appease what lay underneath. Then the odd things began to accumulate. Plaster left on the sarcophagus's lid would be scraped clean in the morning without a hand in sight. Tools would be found in a neat, careful pile at dawn tools, taken the night before and placed back as if the dig itself had its own keeper. The iron scraps resonated with a sound like a small bell when struck, a ring not found in any ordinary metal. In the margin of one of Nikos's ledger books, someone had scrawled in hasty Greek, "He points." No one admitted to the handwriting. No one would explain why the same phrase kept appearing in the margins of different notebooks, as if the site itself had an urge to be read aloud. One clear night, Nikos remained when others left. He told his wife he would prove the superstition wrong. He lit a single lantern and sat near the well. The moon hung like a dull coin. At the hour when dogs quieted, a thin light moved along the furrows, and the sound began faint, a dragging, an iron stroke in the gravel. Nikos rose to follow it. He found, standing by the well, a figure, not fully formed in the lantern light, more impression than body, a man, gaunt, shoulders stooped, with the ghost of iron around his wrists like a memory. The figure extended a hand toward the grove, then turned and vanished in a shimmer that left the air cold and brittle. Nikos wrote afterwards that he felt watched for weeks. He never slept well again. His hair went prematurely white. Within a year, he sold the ruin and left the region. Decades later, a scholar working in a museum cataloging pots from the region found a tablet fragment that matched the painted shard Nikos had recovered. It expanded the fragment into a name, Kallikrates, son of Theron, an unremarkable patronymic, yet it was enough to anchor the rumor. The scholar also found an inscription scratched into the inner rim of a small votive plaque. "Do not disturb, bury the shame." The plaque was intentionally anonymous, written in the rough script of a hurried, fearful hand. Cultural memory is a palimpsest. These pieces gave weight to the story. What had been a whispered local warning hardened into a chronology. Man accused, buried, earth unsettled, light seen, iron heard. But here is the troubling part: the evidence never offered closure. The iron corroded into shapes that refused to read as tools. The marks closed into the stone like letters that do not form words. In the late 20th century, a formal archaeological team arrived, careful, methodical, with cameras and permits. They opened the chamber properly, recorded soil strata, and took samples. They found that the wood of the box had been charred in places, as if flame had licked it before burial. Pollen samples showed a sudden introduction of a non-native plant, which suggested someone had covered the pit hurriedly with off material. Radiocarbon dating gave a window consistent with the early Roman era. But the strangest item was a series of scratch marks discovered beneath the sarcophagus lid fine. Parallel furrows that suggested a hand had tried to claw its way out from within. Microscopy showed the marks contained residue of a fine-grained mineral not native to any nearby bedrock. The residue matched a gray dust found on the shoes of workers who had left the site complaining of nightmares. A recorded sound during a midnight sensor test picked up a low metallic resonance, too low to be wind, too rhythmical to be a natural settling. The team joked nervously on tape about Greek poltergeists. 2 weeks later, one of the senior team members asked for a transfer. He said nothing further. With the archaeologists came the press. Sensational headlines attracted sightseers and scofflaws. Some took souvenirs and suffered bad luck. A car that would not start, a sudden fever, livestock dead in the morning. These anecdotes spread. Where there is narrative, humans find patterns. When a pattern meets fear, it becomes a story that needs a face. A priest in a neighboring village performed a rite in the grove, sprinkling earth and wine and imploring the old gods to forgive the living. He reported a sound afterward like chains rolling downhill. The townsfolk redoubled their offerings and stopped digging. On the final day of excavation, a small object lay under the last slab, a corroded iron ring pinned to the side with a small bent nail. When cleaned, beneath the crust was a tiny incised Mark III short parallel scratches, and beneath them a single deep stroke. The local interpreter, an old shepherd who had never been to the university, trembled and said the symbol meant "remember me." They interred the ring again, wrapped it in a cloth, and reburied it beneath a stone with no name. The archaeologists left in a subdued silence. Those who stayed told us they heard at night, always, a faint dragging like iron in the far distance. What are we left with? A man named on a shard, iron twisted beneath tiles, scratch marks beneath a lid, and a long string of terrified testimony. There's no dramatic exorcism, no neatly written confession. The best any historian can do is point to evidence that resists an easy explanation. Perhaps Kallikrates was a guilty man buried without honor. Perhaps he was innocent and buried to silence a secret. Perhaps the iron and the marks are the result of natural forces misread. Or perhaps something else lingered where it should not have. Ancient cultures believed the earth retained memory. They covered wrongs with ritual because they feared unresolved business would bite back. Whatever the explanation, the people who live near the grove still leave their offerings. They still avoid the track at dusk. They still tell the story in the quiet hours. The tomb was reburied, the ring returned to the soil, and the wind over the olives continues to carry the same scraping sound. Some stories remain because the world will not forget them. Some graves keep their owners for reasons that are not kind. Next chapter, a tale of forbidden love and an even older curse when Kallikrates' name meets the queen's shadow. Subscribe to the Ancient Ghosts Archive. Enter the archive. If you dare.